This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast dealing with the dark feminine. I'm your host, Breach Burke, and in this particular episode, we're going to talk about Nyx and the Night Goddesses. In particular, there are many night goddesses throughout the world, obviously. Night is always personified in some fashion. But we're going to focus on the Greek Roman Nyx, or Nox, as she is in the Roman discussion, and talk also a little bit about the Egyptian Nuit, who's very close and very similar in function. I'm not going to suggest that one myth comes from the other, but it would be interesting to look at these different conceptions of night. And what I want to focus on, because there's not a whole lot of specific stories about the night goddesses. They're usually mentioned in what they call the theogonies, or the creation stories, because night is considered to be something primal, something that came before everything else. So we want to talk about the attributes and qualities of Nyx, or night, and about the offspring of Nyx, because that offspring tends to be very, very significant. And then I want to sort of end with talking about the psychological qualities of things, like looking at the depth psychology regarding Nyx, because she's really a very, very important figure in terms of understanding the depths of the mind. And I feel like the theme that I have for Chthonia, where I'm trying to look at the ways in which we, the unconscious things that drive us, the things that drive us that we don't even have an awareness, and simply making a cognitive decision to change it, to say, I'm not going to think this, I'm going to think that. That doesn't make any difference, because your cognitive mind in no way can override, the force of that dark unconsciousness. It's like spitting in the ocean, to try to, to calm the waves or something. It's useless. Or throwing sand at the ocean. It doesn't actually do anything. So to me, night is a very, very important concept in trying to understand, and not just, by the way, for dark feminine or feminine issues, but, lots of other things too, lots of other things that we assume, many other narratives that we take for granted. Racial narratives is another good example, in the way that we seem to be suspicious of or tend to other what we think of as darkness. Okay. So I'm not going to go off on too long of a social discussion on that, but I do want to talk a little bit about these figures, and then what they represented and what the psychology is behind them. So let me start with Nyx herself. Okay. I'm looking at this from theoi.com is my source, and I've mentioned Theoi, Theoi. And if you would like to get primary source material on the Greek myths, they usually begin with a kind of a summary of the, like an encyclopedic summary of what the deity is, and then they actually will go in and give you translations from where that deity is mentioned in all of the primary source material from both the Greek and Roman world. So I'm going to start here. Nyx was the goddess of night, one of the primordial gods, or the Proto-Genoid as they're called, who emerged at the dawn of creation. She was a child of chaos, and coupling with Erebus, which they translate here as darkness. Erebus better translates as gloom, I think. It's more about that gloomy kind of darkness, the clouds that come over. So Nyx and Erebus, she produces Aether, which it's translated as light, and again, it refers to the blue sky. So the blue sky you see was thought of by the Greeks as the Aether. So that was a child of night and deep gloom. And Hemera, who is the goddess of the day, so really standing in contrast to Nyx. But because she is the child of Nyx, that you definitely get the sense that Nyx is older and in some ways more powerful. It says, alone she spawned a brood of dark spirits, including the fates, sleep, death, strife, and pain. Nyx was an ancient deity usually envisioned as the very substance of the night, a veil of dark mists drawn across the light to obscure the light of Aether, the shining blue of the heavens. Her opposite number was Hemera, who scattered the mists of night at dawn. In ancient art, Nyx was depicted either as a winged goddess or a charioteer, sometimes crowned with an aurora of dark mists. Okay, so let's talk about her offspring. Let's go back. We've talked a little bit about, they've mentioned Hesiod's discussion here. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to do Hesiod, then I want to talk about Homer, and then I want to talk about the Orphics, because these are three different conceptions of Nyx. So Hesiod. I always start with Hesiod because he's a little bit older than Homer. So I think he's worth mentioning first. So in the Theogony, Hesiod says, "Verily at first chaos came to be, but next wide-bosomed Gaia, or the earth, and dim Tartarus, which is the depths, the pit, the dark pit of the earth. In the depth of the wide-pathed earth, Eros, fairest among the deathless gods, who unnerves the limbs and overcomes the mind, and wise counsels of all the gods and all the men with them. From chaos came forth Erebus and black Nyx, but of Nyx were born Aether and Hemera, both whom she conceived and bore from union in love with Erebus. And Gaia first bore starry Uranus, or the heavens, equal to herself, to cover her on every side." Okay, so these Proto-Genoid, these are basically deities that come out of chaos. So they come out of the abyss of chaos. And chaos is really, we talk a lot about chaos, or order versus chaos. Certainly that's come up as a theme in a few of my podcasts. And so what is chaos? Chaos is really just a great void of nothing. It's really just, it tends to be viewed by us very negatively because we don't deal well with uncertainty and the unknown. When I've taught religion, my definition of religion is our means of negotiating the unknown. Science is also a means of negotiating the unknown and may have a quote-unquote religious quality in that sense, in that we do things to try to make sense of the world around us. We believe in things like cause and effect, which, that's the way we experience the world most of the time. Just as we experience time, we measure things. We think about, okay, how many days is something away, how many hours. We think about these kinds of things. And it's really, but really that idea of things being unknown. Even some of the services I offer, okay, I read tarot for people. I read tarot for myself. Why do people want to read tarot? Because they want to know. They want some illumination. They don't want to be in the dark. They want to know what's going on. And these are all, regardless of which methods you accept or don't accept, the bottom line is that you are trying to use your mind, use your perception and your experience to understand something. And what we like is the clarity, the light to be shed on something so that we can see where we're going. That is one of the appeals of Hecate in particular, because she is the one with the torch who lights the way in the underworld. She lights the way in the darkness. So she's very comfortable with the dark. And that's really the place that we're talking about that people need to get to, is how do you become comfortable with the dark, especially when the dark potentially contains all these fearsome things. So we'll talk about the good sides of dark here and the uses of dark. Okay, so we have Hesiod's version. So we see that Nyx, interestingly, Nyx is in the company of Erebus and Tartarus. Okay, so gloom and deep darkness. So we're talking dark, 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 right? And then of course Gaia, who's the earth. But then we have Eros, which is love. So you might think, where does love fit into this? Are we implying a very dark, aspect of love? And what you have to think about it, in order for things to be created, in order to manifest something, there has to be a drive towards it. So you can take it very, very basic level as the sex drive to create, or you can take it as this act, the act of love. There has to be an act of desire. Nothing is going to be created unless there's the desire to bring it forth. And then the desire, whether, and again, I'm not getting into aspects of, say births that are wanted or unwanted or anything like that. I'm talking about the way in which that drive makes us perform actions that then allow creation to occur. So you really need to have Eros as a driving principle. Freud talks a little bit about this when he talks about when he puts so much into the idea of the sex drive, because there is that drive to create, even if it's not a drive to actually have sex. Okay, it's a drive to create things. When you manifest, when I think, again, thinking in tarot terms, okay, you have the Fool, which is sort of represents chaos in a way. There's no there may be some ideas stewing around, but nothing really has a form. Everything might be a risk, it might not be a risk. There's no clear answer as to what the outcome's going to be. And then you move into the next card, which is the Magician, which has to do with having the tools to manifest something, and that is associated with Eros. James Hillman has something to say about Eros in connection with Night, which I'll talk about towards the end. But that's the Hesiod view. Now, in the Dictionary of Greek and Roman Biography and Mythology, not the one that I have at home from grad school, but this is a different one mentioned on Theoi. They talk about Homer referring to Nyx as the subduer of gods and men, and relates that Zeus himself stood in awe of her. Yeah, as we'll see, there are many cases where, there's cases where it will be mentioned that Zeus would have taken some particular action, but he is afraid of the wrath of Nyx. So so even Zeus, who is king of the gods, who has all this power over the universe, he himself is in awe of, and stands back in respect and yields to Night. Okay. Okay, so now the Orphics actually will say that Nyx was the daughter of Eros, which is quite interesting. Nyx comes out of desire, but they have a different, just like they have a different take on Dionysus and on the way in which the cosmos was created. They have a different take on that as well. So let's go through and look at what the Orphics have to say. Says at the and this is from Aristophanes in his it was a comedy called The Birds, but this is considered to be is a reference here. The beginning there was only chaos and dark Erebus and deep Tartarus, Ge or Gaia or Earth, Aether, the upper air, and Uranus. And what is it? Oh no, sorry, Ge, Aether, and Uranus. Punctuation matters here. Had no existence. So yeah, they're pointing to the time when there was only the darkness and the abyss, and that these others didn't have existence. Firstly, black-winged Nyx laid a germless egg in the bosom of the infinite deeps of Erebus, or darkness, and from this, after the revolution of long ages, sprang the graceful Eros, with his glittering golden wings. Okay, so they're also kind of implying that doesn't, well, not kind of, they're implying that Eros does not come about right away. It takes time. Okay, there's time for him to gestate and come out. Okay, there's another Orphic hymn that attributes the stars to being the progeny of Nyx. The Orphic Argonautica claims that let's see. Firstly, ancient chaos's stern Anarche, which means inevitability, and Kronos, time, who bred with his boundless coils Aether, the light, and two-sexed, two-faced, glorious Eros, ever-born Nyx's father, whom latter men called Phanes, for he was first manifested. Okay, so they're equating Phanes with Eros. Phanes is also equated with time, but just as Kronos is. But Phanes was considered to be the sort of primordial deity. And then it says, Phanes placed his distinguished scepter, the rulership of the universe, in the hands of the goddess Nyx, that she hold royalty. Nyx holding in her hands the glorious scepter of Arikepaios, or Phanes. Okay, so yeah, because I remember in the Orphic myth, Nyx is considered to be the ruler of the universe until she hands it over to, it goes first to Uranus, then to Kronos, then to Zeus, and then Zeus chooses Dionysus as his successor. And there's when we think about the connections of Dionysus, there's some some irony there in a way, because because when we think of the religions that tend to dominate the Western world, Christianity is certainly one of them, and Dionysus ends up becoming kind of an archetypal template for Jesus in a way. So in a certain sense, yeah, that particular belief overtakes the other one. Okay. So I don't want to read through every single one of these individual mentions of Nyx, but I wanted to kind of pick a few out. In Nonnus's Dionysica, which was from the 5th century CE, sorry. The ugly form of Hypnos's mother, the black-girdled goddess Nyx. And in this case, they refer to it, but this is actually the goddess Iris. He's talking about the rainbow goddess disguised as Nyx, addressing Hypnos. It says, "O Blackwing, do not provoke Gaia, my father's age mate." So, referring to Nyx, from whom we are all alone are all sprung, we who dwell in Olympus. So there's some, thing in which Hypnos, who is the god of sleep, that there's some action that he's going to take that's going to provoke the Earth Mother. So she's mentioned there. In Homer's Iliad, he says, there in Lemnos, Hera encountered Hypnos. Okay, this is, I talked about this in the podcast on Hera. This is the episode in which she lures Zeus to Mount Ida to have sex with her and then fall asleep. She encountered Hypnos, the brother of Thanatos, which is death, which is also another offspring of Nyx. Hypnos addresses Hera when Hera asks him to put Zeus to sleep. She says, "That time I laid to sleep the brain in Zeus of the Aegis, and drifted upon him still and soft, but your mind was devising evil, and you raised along the sea the blast of the racking winds, and on these swept him away to Kos, the strong-founded, with all of his friends lost. But Zeus awakened in anger and beat the gods up and down in his house, looking beyond all others for me, and would have sunk me out of sight in the sea from the bright sky had not Nyx, who has the power over gods and men, rescued me. I reached her in my flight, and Zeus let be, though he was angry, in awe of doing anything to swift Nyx's displeasure." Okay, so we see that Zeus, even in his angriest and most violent form, will not mess with Nyx. Now, in Hesiod also mentions that in terms of her offspring, this is where I was trying to get to, she bore hateful Moros, which is doom of death, black care, which is the fate of death, Thanatos, which is actual death, and Hypnos, sleep, the tribe of Oneroi, which are the dreams. And again, the goddess murky Nyx, though she lay with none, so this is completely on her own, she bare Momos, which is criticism, and painful Oisis, which is misery, and the Hesperides, which are the goddesses of evening. And she bore the Morai, the fate. Oh boy, Nyx bears the fates. And the fates have control over, the gods can't even override the fates, so think about that. And the ruthless and avenging Charis, or deaths. Also deadly Nyx bare Nemesis, to afflict mortal men, and after her, Apate, deceit, and Philotes, sex, and hateful Geras, old age, and hard-hearted Eris, or strife. Okay, so she's got quite a brood here that she has, that she has created. Now, there's no real specific stories of her beyond this mention of her. There's I'm just trying to see if there's any other particular stories. There are Greek lyrics that talk about her driving her 2-chariot horse along the path. Well, the Hesperides driving their 2-chariot horse chariot along the path of night to the new turning point where Nyx passes through the light, bringing radiance in the eastern air. And she brings the day's light flying over the misty wave, a guide for sailors, gold-flowered Nyx. So we see these different aspects. Even though Nyx is in many ways a faceless goddess, you don't really hear her speak anywhere. She represents, well, she's not only a deity that brings forth all these potentially terrible and awesome things like death and strife and old age and fate. Really, that means Night or Nyx is the deity that brings mortality. She is the one that, mortality exists because of Nyx. Nyx brought it into the world. It doesn't affect the gods, but it does affect human beings. And other human beings, and actually animals and plants and other things that exist on the earth. are subject to these forces. And so therein we see where Nyx becomes a very fearful goddess. On the other hand, she's referred to in different places. Here she's a golden Nyx. Well, she's not really golden, although the night sky, if you look at the night sky unimpeded by what we call light pollution, the night that's actually quite a breathtaking sight. I mean, if you've been out camping in the woods where there are no lights, the sky is actually really, really bright at night. There's not usually a pitch blackness, unless you have a night of, say, an eclipse, or some other kind of circumstance where the sky is covered and there's no light and it can get very, very dark. Nyx still has that, the night goddess is still starry in the appearance. So Nyx isn't entirely pure darkness. And similarly, though, but of course, the light of the night, okay, even with the moon being out, okay, the moon is in the sky, and of course, a full moon can make the night very, very bright. But these forces, the moonlight, to go back to tarot because it is archetypal in its symbolism. When you look at the moon card, the meaning of the moon card has to do more with intuition, with secret knowing, and with a lack of clarity about situations or deception. The idea that you're seeing something, but you might not actually be seeing it clearly, because moonlight, you can see things in the moonlight, but you may not see them very clearly because it's not as bright as the light of the sun. So there's a light, but it's a deceptive light because you can't really see fully. Even when your eyes adjust to the dark, you're not really seeing clearly in the dark. So you have to rely more on your instincts, on your intuition. And that's the realm that Nyx ends up being associated with. Hence you see, she's the mother of dreams. She's the mother of sleep. She's the mother of, all of these sort of fearful, unconscious things that, you try to go to sleep at night and you lay there and you find yourself thinking about all this stuff, like, that one time you got embarrassed like 10 years ago or something, and you're like, why am I thinking about this? I think there's a cartoon. What is it? Is it Awkward Yeti? I'm trying to think if that's the one, but there's the one with the brain that sits there on top of the girl who's trying to sleep. And it'll say something like, did you know that every sea in Pacific Ocean is pronounced differently? And then she's just laying there like wide awake because she can't sleep. Yeah, all of these things that sort of go on in the mind that, and some of them are more annoying than causing misery or heartrending. But, the way in which the mind works in sleep. And of course, we know that dreams often are symbolic of things that are, it's like a way of our unconscious mind trying to tell us, about things that we may be repressing, things that we may be ignoring. Sometimes they're compensatory. So if you've got a really boring and horrible life, you may have great dreams that show you doing wonderful things, as a compensation. Dreams are very, very complicated. And that, of course, leads to the idea that the depths of night have, like Jung would compare that to the depths of the collective unconscious, which is where dreams reside, which is where myths reside, which is where religion resides. We see that everything comes out of this primordial force. Even if you're a monotheist, even if you believe in the biblical religions, okay? I mean, where does everything? What is what's there at the beginning? This abyss. There's Tehom. We talked about Tiamat and the Tehom. There's, and if you think about the idea of the watery or aquatic creatures from the depths, it's the same kind of symbolism. There's a dark, deep chasm, or a dark, deep, you're looking at the vast sky and the darkness of it, and maybe perhaps in wonder at the stars and at the other things that are there. But it represents, it's kind of that vast thing stretching out in front of you, reminding you how small you are, reminding you what you don't know. But you also have to remember that in this when you have something like that, you also have a lot of potential. So with that, I'm going to switch over to talking about Nuit, who is the Egyptian goddess. Now, Nuit is usually portrayed, there's a couple different ways she's portrayed. Usually you will see the image of her like a naked woman covered in stars, stretched out, like, her body arched, like her legs are one, and her body's like a long arch, and then her arms go down. So she becomes an embodiment. Originally, she's an embodiment of the night, but later in Egyptian myth, she becomes an embodiment of the sky, just the sky in general. So when Ra makes his journey in his journey of the sun in his boat or his chariot, he goes into the underworld, which of course, it's watery. It's the underworld. It requires a boat, and really what they're all passing through is the body of Nyx. And the other way that she is represented is as having a water pot on top of her head. Sometimes she's represented as a cow, which would, point to that, what the cows tend to represent. I mean, that's a more motherly image there. Okay, the cow, which is, which provides nourishment. It provides milk. There's, even in the story of Tiamat, when they refer to her as having udders, there's a motherly quality there. The idea of the teats, the breasts, that nourishes something. Now, just a story of Nuit, very quickly. It says she's the daughter of Shu and Tefnut. Her brother and husband is Geb, the god of the earth, although in some versions Ra was her husband and she's cheating with Geb. She has 4 children, Osiris, Set, Isis, and Nephthys, to which is added Horus in a Greco-Egyptian version of the myth. So much later, that was another variation on the Horus myth. She is considered one of the oldest deities among the Egyptian pantheon. Again, just like Nyx, she's old, with her origin being found in the creation story of Heliopolis, which we talked about in the Isis podcast. She was originally the goddess of the night sky, simply the sky goddess. Her headdress was the hieroglyphic part of her name, a water pot, which may also symbolize the uterus. Yeah, and there's the potential, that great void, and being that the night sky, when it's envisioned as female in this way, it's that great vessel, and the vessel, it can represent infinite, all the wisdom and knowledge that perhaps we don't know. It represents potential. It can be that quote-unquote child ready to be born. In the womb that the water pot tends to represent. And again, this is all figurative. We're not talking about necessarily literally bearing children. It's got to do with the way in which things gestate and come into being. So we have this image of Nut, and like I said, she's being symbolized by this idea of the water pot, this idea of the great potential that she holds. Now, in her origins, it says the sacred symbol of Nuit was a ladder used by Osiris to enter her heavenly skies. This ladder symbol was called Maquet and was placed in tombs to protect the deceased and invoke the aid of the deity of the dead. Nut and her brother Geb may be considered enigmas in the world of mythology. In direct contrast to most other mythologies, which usually develop a sky father and an earth mother, she personified the sky and he the earth. Yeah, that's a flip, isn't it? Because actually, okay, in Greek mythology, Uranus, or Uranus as you would say in the Roman, is the sky, is the god of the sky. And Nyx or night is something more primal than that, something beyond the sky. There's like a separation of night and sky, even though we tend to think of them as the same there. And so it's reversed there. Although we do actually see cases where you have, some kind of a male god that dominates the sky, like Ra, the sun god, for instance. And then, who is kind of accepted as ultimately, the sort of the grandfatherly figure, who's like king over everything and has a lot of power. And Isis ends up becoming a kind of secondary earth mother. So there's kind of a sub-myth within there, but the primordial earth is considered to be male and the sky is considered to be female. So I've told the myth of Nuit and Ra, which is but here it is more clearly. I think I was trying to do it from memory last time when I was doing the Isis, so I'll just read it to you clearly here. Ra, the sun god, was second to rule the world according to the reign of gods. He decreed, Nuit shall not give birth any day of the year. At that time, there was only 360 days. Nuit spoke to Thoth, the god of wisdom, and he had a plan. Nuit gambled with Khonsu, the god of the moon, whose light rivaled that of Ra's. Every time Khonsu lost, he had to give Nuit some of his moonlight. Khonsu lost so many times that Nuit had enough moonlight to make 5 extra days. Since these days were not part of the year, Nuit could have her children. She had 5 children: Osiris, Horus, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys. When Ra found out, he was furious. He separated Nuit from her husband Geb for eternity. Okay, there's the separation of earth and sky in Egyptian mythology. And of course, that separation of earth and sky is usually the beginning of time. Okay, that's the beginning of time coming into the world and cycles of life and death having their effect on the world. Her father Shu was given the job to keep them apart. Nonetheless, Nuit did not regret her decision. Okay, and some of her titles were Coverer of the Sky, She Who Protects, and the Mistress of All. Okay, and so she becomes a symbol of protection, protecting the dead when they enter the afterlife, because there is a huge connection between the underworld and the the night goddesses. And in fact, I should mention that Nyx's mansions, or her palace, is in the depths of the underworld. That is where her palace is located. And also I should say Nyx's, the few temples that are dedicated to Nyx are yet generally oracular temples. They're oracles. Okay, which again, that connection of the deep darkness and oracles, prophecy, trying to see the future, right? Having, appealing to the night goddess who represents that scary unknown to make things known. Okay, because it's assumed that within that darkness that the future or the truth is known. Okay. Okay. The Book of Nuit is a modern title. It was known in the ancient times as the Fundamentals of the Course of the Stars, which is a collection of Egyptian astronomical texts going back to at least 2000 BCE. Nut, of course, being the sky goddess, plays a big role. The text also tells about various other sky and earth deities, okay, such as the star deities and the decans, which the lunar mansions, which you deal with if you practice astrology. You have a familiarity with the decans and what they do. So, yeah, and of course, the more that you start to have a society that looks to the stars and astrology for determining the course of a life, or saying that the human life is going to be mirrored in this, in the stars, then certainly the sky, takes on a lot more importance. But the sky also then becomes, in Egyptian religion notwithstanding, in Greek religion, this is when you start to, when those male influences start to become more important, because we start to associate the sky more with the rational masculine. Because it's in the stars where you can read what the destiny is. So, okay, people, again, whatever your opinion is of astrology, certainly at that time, that was considered to be a map of the person's life. Many people still believe in astrology. I find astrology to be useful, not the daily horoscope kind of thing you read in, some of the daily, I shouldn't say that. Some daily horoscopes are pretty good if they're based on your birth date and time and place. General, like, oh, I'm a Taurus, so I'm going to read Taurus. Well, for me, I happen to be, that's only a real small part. The sun sign is only a very small part of your, of what your chart would be. Your ascendant, it plays a role. Your moon sign plays a role. In Vedic astrology, those are key. Your sun sign is secondary. And your charts are never based on that. In fact, Vedic astrology is astonishingly accurate in things like timing and so forth. And I'm saying this from experience. I wouldn't have expected that from it. But I've had situations. Well, I'll give you a really quick example because I don't want to diverge into this. But I had, I had been looking for a new job for a while. I had been working in a place that was very, very stressful. And I had gone to certain academic institutions. I was interviewed. I was like one of the top 2 candidates, and I never got the job. And, I just never seemed to be, even though these were things I was very fully qualified for and well known for in my field, I couldn't seem to get the job. And so, and then one day I was in my office and I happened to see an opening at the place where I work now. For a digital archivist, and I happened to know the person in charge of the department at that time. I happen to be in charge of that department now, but I'd called her, and she was like, oh, you'll probably be bored here. And I was like, after what I was going through at my current job, I'm like, I'll take it. I'd rather sit down and make a new project and be bored. So she had talked to the university librarian who I knew, and they were like, yeah, come on over. So on January 31st, 2007, I was made an offer. And I had gone to see my Jyotish or Vedic astrologer about 2 or 3 months later. And he had said to me, I'd said to him, well, I have a new job. And he went back, he says, you do? He says, wait a minute. He stopped and he looked through my chart. He goes, January 31st, 2007, right? This past January. I said, yeah. Why? How do you know that? He's like, well, that's the first day it would have been possible for you. He says, if you tried to look for a job before that, it wouldn't have happened. So it's like, how do you get the date right on? Like, that's the kind of thing with astrology that I'm like, wait, what? Those are the things. It's sort of like even having psychic readings. When somebody says something very general, like, oh, I see you meeting, a handsome stranger, and yeah, okay, whatever. If you say, oh, this is their name, this is where they live, this is how old they are, this is what they look like, and then you find out that it actually happens that way, and then you're like, okay, wait a minute. That's really specific. Specificity goes a lot towards credibility, let's put it that way. So anyway, not wanting to diverge into that, but pointing out that astrology, that's when the sky starts to become a place where you can find knowledge, where you can reliably learn about the future if you know how to read what you're seeing in front of you. It's another extension of reading oracles and omens. It was the way people would say, follow the pattern of birds, where they used to sacrifice animals and read their entrails, and, just certain appearances of certain things like eclipses and storms at different times. They all had a meaning. And this was how you tried to decode or interpret. This is what your priestly class, this is what your oracles, their professional oracles, like this is what they did. Now, okay, so what we see here then is that, so that there's this connection of the goddesses to the underworld. And when we connect the night to the underworld, what we're talking about here are those depths. Now, in Jungian psychology, the collective unconscious is a place where, as I've mentioned, it's a place. Jung postulated it as something. First of all, it's not something located in the brain. Let's start there, because we always tend to think of, memory's located here, or this is located here. And I'm going to tell you, nothing is located anywhere. If you, for example, if you talk about the amygdala as the emotional center or the anxiety center that will light up when you are feeling emotional about something or anxious about something, that is not, the amygdala, there's no way to say that you are emotional because your amygdala is active. Your amygdala becomes active because you're emotional. Like, that's the chemical reaction in your brain. It's not, there's no way, to me, if neurologists are saying, oh yeah, well, that's the source of your emotional problem. No, it isn't. And what they'll do is frequently give people drugs to kind of calm the reactions in there. Now, I suppose it is possible, like any organ, that it can become over-traumatized and overactive. That could happen. And then thus create emotional responses where they aren't needed. But the idea that all of your emotions and everything come from different parts of your brain, I would say no, and that's not proven either. The source of things like emotions and consciousness itself are very mysterious, and that's what this really deals with, is the mystery of that. We think we can decode certain things about it, but there's also an awful lot that we don't know. And even science to these days, that they can't explain where consciousness come from. They can't explain how it works. You can't explain everything in terms of biological function. It doesn't work. It doesn't explain, because it's not literally not just about survival. So, and then again, so then we have things like dreams and so forth. So Jung had postulated, just from his own psychological work, that there was, there's your ego, your persona, your conscious mind. Then there's a personal unconscious, which consists of your memories, things that have happened to you, both good things and traumas and different things. And then there's what was the other thing? Yeah, so there's that. And then there's the collective unconscious, which is outside of time. And again, none of these things are quote unquote located in the brain. It's a space beyond space and time. And it contains sort of that collection of human archetypal, what he calls archetypal material. So that would include dreams, that would include myths, that would include religions. It includes all of those things that we experience but really can't put into words. And that part of our consciousness, he would say, has a tremendous influence on us to the point where we don't always know when it's doing that, and we don't have control over it. The analyst is somebody who would sit there and go, who'd be able to see when that happens, but just because you see it happening doesn't mean you can stop what it's doing. And the simplest example I give is falling in love. There is an archetype. There are archetypes of what they call anima and animus. And the anima is usually considered to be present in men. That's the female aspect of a man. And, the animus as the male aspect of a woman. Now, and I should also note that, I understand in non-binary situations that, how this works might be a little different. Nonetheless, there's still the idea of this soul. And when somebody falls in love, you project that soul image, that archetype, onto somebody else, which is why you can fall madly in love with somebody who, rationally speaking, is no good for you and you shouldn't waste your time on. And then you're caught. It's like you can say to yourself, well, this isn't a good situation and I shouldn't do it. You can't just turn your feelings off like a water faucet. It doesn't happen. And it may take you a long time, or you may find ways to rationalize why you should be involved or why this is good. It's like it's like you're caught. It's like a possession. You're caught. And that's like the clearest example of how an archetype can take a hold of you. It can take a hold of you in a lot of other ways too. They're very unpleasant. And when the archetype comes into the fore like that, Jung would call that a constellation. Like it's moving around the way the constellations do in the sky. Now it's visible. It's there. But you still can't say exactly what it is. All you can do is experience what it's doing to you. And this is where, we have these ups and downs and uncertainties and things that happen. And that's the realm of Nyx. That's the realm of night. Okay. I want to read a little piece from James Hillman, and then I'm probably going to end here because I, wanted to make the point about that connection there. Okay. In Hillman's book, James Hillman was a Jungian writer and analyst, and he's written a tremendous amount on depth psychology, and this book is called The Dream in the Underworld. It's one of my favorite. And he has on this one called The Brood of Night. He says, the strong contrast between day and night, as well as housing of dreams only with the night world of sleep and with death, begins with Heraclitus. Already in Homer's Iliad, Hypnos and Thanatos are twin brothers, sleep and death. They are not merely poetic allegories of abstract ideas. Hypnos in Homer is already a real person able to decide whether or not to grant someone sleep or not. These very vivid, powerful persons who govern our darkness are sons of night, according to Hesiod's Theogony. They are part of her great brood, which includes old age, envy, strife, doom, lamentation, destiny, deceit, and dreams. In the Odyssey, Homer locates dreams either in the house of Hades, as part of his realm, or close by in their own house in the Western Ocean, where the sun goes down. For Virgil, the entire brood of night resides in the underworld, and this remains a convention in Roman poetry. Ovid says in Metamorphosis that dreams appear like creatures of the underworld without bodily life. Homer has put the same thought in reverse. The psyche of the dead flits about and hovers about to and fro like a dream. Orphic mythology also groups dreams with death and with sleep, where the brother of death and of forgetting. A more distant parallel comes from the Hindu Atartha Veda, where it said that the dream comes from Yama's world, who is the lord of the dead. We see the archetypal cluster to which dreams belong, according to the most ancient and continuous model in our tradition, is the world of night. Each dream is a child of night, affiliated closely with sleep and death, and with forgetting, which is Lethe, all that the daily world remembers. Dreams have no father, no call upwards. They only come from night. They have no home other than that dark realm. Such then is the genealogy of dreams, the myth of their origins, describing their archetypal kinship, telling us where they belong. So he talks about, he said, I've stressed both the historical length of the tradition and its poetic strength, believing that the mythopoeic presents archetypal truth through its imaginative power, just as the historical exhibits archetypal truth through its power to endure. Freud is again a witness, and he said that dreams protect sleep, and that's their sole purpose. He puts dreams and sleep in their ancient fraternal connection. In the same context, when Freud says that the architect of dreams is Eros, because dreams by fulfilling erotic wishes also protect sleep, he was imagining Eros as part of the brood of night. Yeah, and I would argue that I would also say that most people we don't take Freud quite that way in dream interpretation anymore. But the idea that they come from a drive of some kind, like an archetypal drive, is certainly seems to be true. If we follow this notion of Eros, then it is the brother of death and not the principle that will save us from it. There would then be a closer bond between what goes on in dreams and a love that fulfills itself in darkness, in the intangible bodies of psychic images. Thus there is a downward love, and not only in Eros stretching its arms towards the horizon of others. This downward love appears all through later antiquity as statues of amor, another word for love. Wings folded, his torch pointing downward. The same yearning for the depths becomes literalized in romanticism and even enacted in suicidal love pacts. Yeah, because that talks about the nature of love. Love can be ecstatic and wonderful, but it can also be extremely depressing. We may realize here that Eros is not so simple, neither in life nor myth. Is Eros the connecting life principle, a libido that wants unions, as Freud says, and does it pertain to the more feminine, as Jung says? Is Eros an ever-needy child of want, which Plato says, a sleepy, languorous little boy, or a son of Venus, arrowing straight into our life, her desires and her pleasures? Does he come first as a progenitor of everything, as some myth held, or a first virtue of the Christian sense? Or is Eros a brother of Hades himself? Myth leaves the definition of Eros when in perplexity, or rather it only speaks of Eros within a specific context, such as this one, which puts Eros in the bed of sleep, death, and dreams among the brood of night. Modern statements about Eros, which contemporary psychology is so romantically resplendent, carry no validity unless these statements are developed against one another, or against the precise archetypal background of Eros. What a person says about love tells more about the person than about love. It tells within which fantasy his experience of Eros is enacted. This brood of night gives the dream an atmosphere that's far from the happy optimism of growth psychology or the secret delight of sexual desire. We are not being told that our dreams help us, that they round out our lives by indicating the direction of our creative tendencies, nor are we being told that dreams pour out of an id pool of libidinal pleasure or a wishing well. Instead, they're akin to deceits and conflicts, to the lamentations of aging, the doom of our destiny, in a word, depression. The dream takes us downward, and the mood that corresponds with this movement is the slowing, saddening, and introspective feeling that can be associated with depression. This has different faces. To the heroic consciousness of the ancient world, night was the source of all evil, while to the mystic consciousness of the Orphics, night was the depth of love and light. Our consciousness today is less mystic than heroic, and we need incantations to summon Hypnos or Hermaeus to help us drop off to sleep. A ritual of prayer, toothbrushing and teddy bear, food cramming, the late show of nightcap and sleeping pill. The basic bedtime story of our culture is that to sleep is to dream, and to dream is to enter the house of the Lord of the Dead, where our complexes lie in wait. We do not go gentle into that good night. Okay, which I think is a fantastic statement. And I'll actually end with a statement that I want to think about the fact that we have this darkness, that it can represent all of these things. But remember, too, that these things all have a purpose. Even the sense of feeling depressed, it's your psyche and your body working together to say, stop, whatever you're doing, you're hurling yourself into destruction, or you need to stop and think about what you're doing. Or you need time to reflect and to be alone. We get ourselves so caught up in the things we do every day. One of the things COVID actually did for us was to make everybody slow the F down and just sit and be at home. And even if this was a situation where, say, you're in a house with your partner or with your kids, or doing the school thing, nonetheless, it makes you examine very closely the kind of life that you have, the kind of relationships that you have, what you're doing, what you're living, what you've been doing for a living. Do you want to keep doing that? All of these things. And that represents the possibility of darkness, the possibility of the lack of clarity. It's like, there could be scary things out there, but there's also the potential for you to do something very new and different. And since love is also there in Eros, there's also that drive, that desire to create something that is truly authentically you and that truly makes you happy. And we need to think about this when we think about darkness in general, because as I've noted, we tend to, as cultures, and part of this is colonial, the colonialism, but this idea of whiteness or lightness being greater than darkness. And even in other cultures, not just in the U.S. or even European countries, I've seen it, for instance, in India and other places too, where darker skinned people are treated as lesser. And it's because either there's an assumption that there's, and the thing is, okay, it's always sort of done unconsciously. But not sort of, it is a lot of times, it's not always done unconsciously, I guess is what I mean. But there's definitely a narrative or an attitude that treats darkness as distrustful in some way, or not reliable, or something that needs to be kept under control in some fashion. And you really need to, yes, okay, we're talking about very foundational archetypal stuff that, and because it has such a strong hold on us, we really have to think, it really takes, these things can actually be changed with time. You can change this. You're not like the perpetual victim of an archetype. But you have to cultivate that awareness, and you have to be somewhat vigilant about trying to identify those patterns. And they're not that easy to identify. It's very hard. And not only in terms of the feminine, in terms of women, but in terms of these other things. Anybody that's marginalized or treated as an other. It's like, okay, you have to stop and be able to face up to that unknown and be comfortable with it. Which I think is probably why so many people seem to be drawn to Hecate. There's this idea of having that comfort in darkness, being able to see that light, being able to feel secure about where you are in an unsecure world. Okay, that's it for this week. I want to thank you again very much for listening. Please visit Chthonia.net for all of my works, and my other website info, my other website, liminalreiki.com, should be up again by now. And you can check that out if you're interested in my other services and helping people exactly through these very same processes of feeling, of facing that darkness, of facing that lack of clarity. I work on that on a practical level with people, in both a teaching and an individual one-on-one mode, as well as providing the podcast, and I have my books that are out as well, where I talk about it both academically and certain aspects of it in fiction. So Chthonia.net, and also if you'd like to support my work, patreon.com/Chthonia. Thank you very much to everybody who is supporting me now, and if anybody wants to sign up and support me, I very much appreciate your support, and I appreciate all of you. Thanks again for listening. Till next time.